Hi, I'm Jean Nolte, editor at Fons & Porter.
And I'm Colleen Tauke, and I'm the sewing specialist for Fons & Porter. In today's tutorial, we're going to show you how to construct the rain stick quilt.
For the pattern for this quilt, go to shopfonsandporter.com/quiltingquickly. Okay, so this is really an easy quilt. It is made totally from 2.5-inch pre-cut strips. You need 2 packages of strips or 80 strips. We have 20 colors and 4 strips of each color. So the first thing we would do is cut 4 14.5-inch rectangles from each strip and 21 2.5-inch squares from each strip. And we're going to make blocks that look like this, and we need 20 of them.
Okay.
So the first thing, I think, let's make this
that side of the unit first. That sounds like a good
Okay.
idea. So we select 4 strips. We have already stitched 2 of them. We've matched them right sides together. And we are going to stitch in one direction. I've marked it with an arrow that I have stitched starting here and finishing at the bottom. Now, when we go to join the next 2 together, we want to stitch from the other side. The reason for that is that if you keep stitching in one direction, your set of strips will get a distinctive twist, and it won't look like a rectangle anymore. It will look more like a diamond. So in order to reverse that, we are going to arrow at the bottom. We're going to start stitching on this end. Now, right sides together. Make sure that you've got your machine set for a 1/4-inch seam allowance. If you haven't sewn a lot on your sewing machine yet, go back and double check to make sure that the 1/4-inch seam is actually a 1/4-inch.
That'll be
Sometimes they're a
important
little
when you're doing all of these squares because you have so many seams.
Exactly.
And if your seam allowance is too big or too small, it's not going to be the right size to fit on the
other
rectangle
side of the unit,
strips.
exactly.
Yeah.
A real quick test to check the 1/4-inch seam. So remember those lined recipe cards, note cards out there? The lines are exactly a 1/4-inch apart. So if you take one of those, drop the needle into one of the blue lines on a note card, one of the blue lines should be right along the edge of your presser foot. That way you'll know for sure if you've got an accurate 1/4-inch seam.
All right.
Now
Now we're going to press that, and we're going to press the seam allowances all to one side. So in one direction, right?
right. And then when you go to press, you should always set the seam first. Warm up the fibers. Help them to nudge them over into one direction. It will set the seam, make everything nice and flat.
I don't think I did very well on my first one. I'm going to have to go back and check that.
Well, you can always there's always do-overs in quilting. That's the good thing.
And I think I might have to do that on this one. I think this one, yeah, got a little flip right there.
Yep.
So there we go. Oh, now I just press that corner. So now we have that unit.
Created the side unit.
Okay,
Exactly.
now we need to make these. So this is where you use the squares. And so you started out by making groups of 3, right?
Exactly.
First lay out all 21 squares. So what you need is 1 square of every color plus one
Plus
more.
one. There's always one.
So
in
there's
every
always
bunch.
2 of some color in this
Right.
group.
Because this is kind of like shuffling a deck, you want to work with individual squares so that you don't get 2 purple squares right next to each other or 2 of the bright yellows right next to each other. So what I did when I was creating it is I just went ahead and laid out each of the squares and created rows of 3. Once you have your rows of 3, then you play around with them and make sure that you get them where you want.
Get them highlighted. So
Simply just go in and seam each side, and then as you're laying them out, then you can decide, okay, I'm going to press the seam allowances on this one to the outside edge,
So you would look here.
to the outside edge,
These go away from the center.
and these go towards the center block.
So you alternate that way. And you're going to join these into pairs, except of course for the last one, since you have 7 groups.
So now
So-
when you put 2 blocks together, you'll have opposing seams. One have seam allowance going one direction, one going the other. They nest together nice and neat. And if we put just a couple of pins in place, things won't shift when we get under the presser foot.
Those should just line up perfectly after you get them stitched.
It just takes a little time to get that accuracy. I think sometimes quilts don't get finished when people get upset. Things don't quite turn out the way they want, and they think, I'm not going to do it anymore. But if if you take just that few seconds to set seams, to press, to double check your quarter and seam allowance, you'll have a lot more fun. And quilting should be fun.
Absolutely. So this is a quilt you could really make in a pretty short time. Because a lot of the cutting is done for you. You just have to cut the rectangles and the squares. Probably in a weekend you could finish this quilt top.
So now when we open up, we should end up with, yep,
Look at that. Perfect.
squares, nice and neat, and the
Then
points.
you're going to join that.
You would join pairs until you get
So
all
then we're going to
21
sew
pairs.
those together,
Like that.
and you end up with this block.
Okay.
You need 20 blocks to make the quilt, and if you look, the quilt here alternates the direction of the blocks, so the squares just sort of stair-step through the quilt. And if you notice, we used the leftover 2.5-inch strips to make a scrappy binding.
Right. There were just some left pieces. I didn't even worry about what length they were. I just joined them together and created enough binding so that we didn't have to have extra fabric. Thank you for joining us today.
For more of our videos, go to video.fonsandporter.com.